The old manor sat hunched on the hill like a dying beast, shadowed by gnarled trees whose skeletal limbs clawed at the sky. It had been abandoned for decades, all except for the ancient stone well in the backyard, black as a wound and always slick with moisture, even in droughts. Locals warned, never speak into the well after dark, never answer when it calls. When Mara inherited the house from a distant, forgotten relative, she scoffed at the rumors. Ghost stories for children, she thought, a relic of small-town fear. The first night, half drunk and giddy with the freedom of owning something so grand, she wandered outside under a silver coin moon. Wine glass in hand, she leaned over the crumbling rim of the well, peering into its darkness. Her breath fogged slightly, though the night was warm. Just to mock the old superstition, she whispered her name into the depths. "Mara," she said, giggling. At first, there was only the night chorus. Frogs croaking, leaves rustling, a far-off owl. Then something answered, faint and wet, from somewhere far below. "Mara." Her laughter died in her throat. Goosebumps prickled her skin. She told herself it was an echo, the suggestion of old ghost stories curling in her mind. She stumbled back into the house, locking the door behind her, though she wasn't sure why. That night she dreamed vividly, a pale, bloated hand clawing from the well, nails black with rot, reaching for her. When she woke, the dream clung to her like cobwebs. Worse, muddy handprints smeared the wooden floor leading from the back door, which was still bolted shut. Each day the whispers grew bolder, from the drains, from the vents, from beneath the bed, whispering her name, begging, promising. Desperate, Mara sought answers from the town historian, a stooped man with paper-thin skin and trembling hands. "The well," he muttered when she mentioned it, his face drained of color. "It's a prison, not a grave. They threw something down there, a thing summoned by blood rituals, long forgotten. A bargain gone wrong. They chained it, sealed it, but you can't chain hunger. Not forever." "What thing?" Mara demanded. The old man only shook his head, whispering a prayer under his breath. "It knows your name now. That's enough." That night, storms pounded the manor. Lightning ripped the sky apart in bone-white veins. Mara awoke to the heavy, wet slap of footsteps across the wood floors. She hid under the bed, clutching a rusted letter opener. The footsteps stopped at her bedroom door. Sniff, sniff, a low growl of satisfaction. The door creaked, hinges screaming in protest, but it didn't open. Instead, something whispered under the doorframe. "Found you." By dawn, the door was shattered. Claw marks gouged deep into the frame. Mara fled the manor, shivering and half-mad, but no one in town would take her in. "You're marked," they said grimly. "The well doesn't forget." Determined to end it, Mara returned one last time. She carried a bucket of quick-setting cement and a crowbar. She would seal the cursed mouth forever. Under a bruised, swirling sky, she approached. Wind whipped her hair. The well gaped, almost expectantly. Her hands shook as she pried off the rotted wooden cover. She lifted the bucket, but before she could pour it, a slick, bone-white hand shot up, latching onto her wrist with a vice-like grip. She shrieked, struggling, but it yanked her down with inhuman strength. Another hand surfaced, then another, pulling itself out. A faceless thing, mouth slashed ear to ear in a jagged smile, stitched together from the bodies of those it had taken. It was the whispers, the hunger, and now it had a new voice. "Mara," it crooned in a voice too many layered. "Come home." It dragged her screaming into the darkness below. Weeks passed, then months. The manor still stood, silent and rotting. But now, when daring teenagers whispered into the well at midnight, two voices answered back. One was wet and guttural. The other was Mara's, soft and pleading. "Come closer," she would whisper. "It's lonely down here." And sometimes, if you listen very closely, you'll hear the sound of nails scraping against stone. A warning too late, because the well was no longer just waiting, it was hungry. Sophie had always been drawn to things others discarded. Broken clocks, half-torn paintings, forgotten photographs. They whispered to her from the dusty corners of flea markets and estate sales. Photography wasn't just a hobby for her. It was her anchor in a world that often felt too fast, too cruel. Maybe that's why the Polaroid caught her eye. At a sleepy Sunday garage sale tucked between stacks of yellowed magazines, it sat. A Polaroid SX70, silver trim dulled with age, leather peeling at the edges. The man selling it was pale, gaunt. His hands trembled as he pressed it into her palms. "Take it, please." His voice was a croak. She tried to offer him $20, but he backed away, shaking his head violently. "No money, just go." Shrugging, Sophie took it home. The Polaroid cleaned up nicely. She loaded fresh film and took photos of her apartment, her mismatched furniture, her sun-drenched plants, the cracked mirror by the door. At first, she blamed the camera's age for the strange shapes that developed. In the living room photo, a faint blur by the window. In the hallway shot, a darker smudge near the closet. But the shapes grew clearer with each picture. By Tuesday, she captured an image that made her drop the photo. A tall, thin man in a black suit, standing motionless behind her kitchen table. His face, or lack thereof, was a smooth expanse of skin. Cold dread slithered up her spine. Trying to stay rational, Sophie conducted tests. She used her phone to snap photos of the same spots. Nothing strange. Only the Polaroid caught the figure. She asked her friend Liam to visit. Laughing, he posed for a few Polaroids, until he saw the developed pictures. In each one, the faceless man lurked closer, sometimes almost brushing Liam's shoulder. Liam left in a hurry and stopped answering her calls. Desperate, Sophie scoured online forums, ghost hunters, conspiracy theorists, photo restoration experts. None had answers. Some warned her to destroy the camera. Some said it was too late. Still, she clung to disbelief. There had to be a logical explanation. That night, she set up the Polaroid on a tripod in the living room, programming it to snap a photo every 5 minutes. She barely slept, heart pounding in dread. At dawn, she retrieved the stack of photos. The sequence told a story. First, an empty room. Then, a shadow by the window, and then the figure by the stairs, halfway up. Outside her bedroom door, she flipped faster, hands trembling. The door ajar, the figure inside. Standing over her, the last photo, him leaning so close that it looked like he was whispering into her ear. Sophie's scream was raw. In a panic, she hurled the Polaroid into the trash and left the house. Hours later, still shaking at a cafe, she convinced herself she'd imagined it all. Sleep deprivation, stress, some chemical trick of light. Returning home, she found the Polaroid on her neatly made bed. Beside it, a fresh photo. She stared in horror. It showed her sleeping. The man's faceless form crouched so close, fingers inches from brushing her hair. Bile rose in her throat. This time she didn't hesitate. She built a roaring fire in the fireplace and hurled the camera into it, watching until the metal and plastic twisted into a blackened mass. The air smelled like burning plastic and something worse, rotten meat. That night, Sophie triple-checked the locks. She dragged a dresser against her door. She slept with a kitchen knife under her pillow. Still, at precisely 3:13 a.m., she woke to a soft click. The Polaroid fluttered down onto her chest. Hands shaking, she lifted it. The photo showed her, eyes wide open, and behind her the man loomed, his smooth blank face tilted down as if savoring the moment. She screamed so loud her throat tore. But no neighbors came. No lights flicked on. It was as if the world had forgotten her. Desperate, Sophie dug into the camera's history. The garage sale had belonged to a man named Robert Hensley, a photographer who had vanished without a trace 2 years prior. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about Robert's final days. Strange visitors, endless photographs pinned to every wall, muttering about capturing him before he crossed over. One neighbor remembered seeing a photo pinned above Robert's fireplace, a photo of Robert asleep, and a dark, faceless figure standing over him. The day after that, Robert disappeared, and now the camera had chosen her. The faceless man wasn't just a spirit, he was something older, something hungrier. He wasn't content to appear in photos. Each snapshot brought him closer to the physical world. Each photo was an invitation. Sophie's blood ran cold. She realized she had been feeding him every time she snapped a picture. Every photo was a thread sewing him tighter into her life. Burning the camera hadn't stopped it. The deal was already made. Sophie barricaded herself at home, covering every reflective surface. No cameras, no mirrors, no windows left uncovered. But the Polaroids kept appearing, falling from the ceiling, sliding out from under her door. Each photo showed the man closer, his hand outstretched. The final photo showed Sophie herself, holding the Polaroid camera, a blank expression on her face, the man standing behind her, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. In the photo, Sophie's face was beginning to blur. She was becoming part of the photograph. Sophie understood what she had to do. She would destroy every photo, every link. But as she tore the pictures to shreds, the world around her began to distort. Walls bled into each other. The air grew thick and heavy. At 3:13 a.m. the next night, police were called to Sophie's apartment after neighbors heard strange noises. They found the place abandoned, all belongings intact, except the walls were covered in hundreds of Polaroid photos. Photos of Sophie, photos of the man, photos of anyone who dared look too closely. 2 weeks later, at another flea market, a curious young woman stumbled across a slightly melted but still functional Polaroid camera. The vendor smiled thinly and said, "Take it, just take it." She did, and somewhere in the shadows the faceless man smiled too. The hospital was old, falling apart. Its once majestic exterior had faded, and time had left its mark in the form of cracks in the walls, peeling paint, and an eerie silence that seemed to hover like a heavy fog. The top floors had been condemned for years. Rumors had spread like wildfire, whispering about strange happenings, strange noises, flickering lights, shadows moving when no one was there. But the most chilling of all was the story about the 6th floor. They said it was haunted. Nina had been working as a night nurse at the hospital for a week now. She had heard the stories, but she was a skeptic, someone who needed more than ghost stories to believe in the supernatural. Ghosts didn't scare her. What frightened Nina was the decay, the way the hospital seemed to be slowly dying, like an old woman clinging to life. One rainy evening, as she made her rounds, she heard the screech of tires outside, followed by the sharp sound of an ambulance siren. She didn't think much of it, just another accident. But when the emergency room doors burst open, a frantic woman rushed in, clutching her son's limp body against her chest. His face was pale, blood trickling from his nose, and his arms hung limp by his sides. "Car crash," the woman gasped, her eyes wide with panic. "We need room 616. Nina froze for a moment. She looked at the woman and then back at the boy. The child looked like he had already passed away, but she couldn't say that. She knew better than to judge based on appearances. "There's no room 616, Nina said, her voice calm, trying to keep the situation from escalating. "This is the ER, ma'am. We'll get him into a treatment room right away." "No," the woman's voice cracked. "There is a 616. I know it's there, please. It's the only place. He has to be in there." Her voice was desperate, tinged with a madness that Nina had never heard before. Nina frowned. "I'll help you, but we need to take him to the treatment area." "No, it has to be 616. The woman screamed, her face twisting in anguish. "Please, top floor, at the end of the hall. Please, don't let him die." Against her better judgment, Nina nodded. There was no arguing with a mother in such a state. She quickly helped the woman and her son into the elevator, though a strange unease settled in her stomach. The elevator groaned as it rose, the metal walls creaking, the lights flickering intermittently, as if the building itself were protesting their ascent. The elevator doors finally opened, revealing the long-abandoned 6th floor. The hallway stretched out in front of them, dark and silent, save for the flickering of weak lights overhead. The smell of mildew was thick in the air, and dust clung to every surface. It was as if no one had been here in years. "There it is," the woman whispered, her voice filled with reverence. She began to walk, dragging the boy's limp body behind her, her heels clicking sharply on the tiled floor. Nina hesitated. "Ma'am, this isn't a proper room. It's a condemned floor. You shouldn't be here." But the woman didn't stop. She continued forward, her eyes fixed on the end of the hall where a single door stood. room 600Cs. It was a stark contrast to the surrounding decay. The door was pristine, untouched by time, as though it had been freshly painted. The handle gleamed in the dim light. The woman reached the door first, her hands trembling as she turned the handle and pushed it open. She rushed inside without looking back. Nina, despite her doubts, followed. Inside, the room was strange, too strange for Nina's comfort. The walls were a bright, sterile white, too clean, too perfect. The bed was made up like it had been prepared for a patient who had just arrived, the sheets smooth and untouched. The machines around the room hummed softly, their lights blinking in quiet rhythm, the beeping of the heart monitor oddly calming. Nina could feel a chill run down her spine, but she pushed it aside. There was something unsettling about this room, but she had to do her job. The mother laid the boy on the bed and immediately began sobbing. She clutched his hand, rocking back and forth, whispering to him, begging him to wake up. Nina checked the boy's vitals. He was dead. Flatline. There was nothing she could do. She glanced up at the monitors, but they were still blinking, the screen showing a slow, steady pulse that shouldn't have been there. She turned back to the mother. "I'm so sorry. There's nothing more we can do for him." Her voice was soft, almost sympathetic, but the woman didn't seem to hear her. Instead, the woman turned, her eyes locking with Nina's. And then she smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile someone gives when they're grateful. It was wide, too wide, stretching unnaturally across her face, a grin so wide it seemed almost predatory. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice low and calm, like a snake hissing in the dark. "There's room for one more." Before Nina could respond, the door slammed shut behind her, the sound deafening in the eerie silence of the room. She spun around in shock, her breath catching in her throat. The lights above her flickered violently, casting shadows that seemed to writhe and twist. When she turned back to the bed, the boy was gone. The mother was gone. The room was empty. Nina's heart began to race as panic set in. She rushed to the door, banging on it with her fists. "Let me out, please," she screamed. But there was no answer, no sound from the other side. She scrambled to the window, but there was nothing but darkness outside, the rain battering against the glass, muffling any sound. She tried the door again, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the handle twisted and the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was an orderly, his eyes wide with confusion. "What are you doing up here?" he asked, his voice sharp. Nina stumbled backward, trying to explain. "There was a woman and her son. They were here, But the orderly just stared at her, shaking his head. "There's no one up here, miss. Room 61C was sealed after the fire 5 years ago." Nina felt her stomach drop. "What fire?" she whispered. The orderly hesitated before answering, his voice solemn. "A woman and her son died in that room. A terrible fire. They say their spirits are still looking for someone to take their place. They won't let anyone leave once they've come in." Nina's blood ran cold. "No, that's not..." But before she could finish, the orderly grabbed her by the arm and pulled her out of the room. He escorted her downstairs, where the head nurse was waiting. She listened grimly as Nina recounted what had happened. "Room 616, sealed after the fire," the nurse said quietly. "But it seems like the legends were true. There's always room for one more." Later that night, after a long and exhausting shift, Nina returned to her tiny apartment. She stepped inside, her legs heavy with exhaustion. She flipped on the light and froze. Her apartment looked wrong. Her bed was made up like a hospital cot, sterile white sheets, the mattress too stiff. There were monitors beeping in the corners of the room, their lights casting an eerie glow on the walls. And the walls themselves, they were glowing. A faint, sterile white, just like the room. And then she heard it. That voice, soft, whispering, "Room for one more." Nina turned, but there was no one there. A cold sweat broke out across her skin as her heart pounded in her chest. The walls seemed to close in on her, and the whispers grew louder. Her eyes widened in horror as she realized she had never left room 616. And now it was her turn to fill the empty space.